Terribly sorry I missed 2 days this time, but there's just so much to be done here. There is such a mess in this state. And I have to say, between, just trying to clean stuff up and, help out neighbors and family and stuff like that and work, and this is very, very hard to get, take an hour out of my day to record something for this. But I can't resist because there is so much going on. Hell, we got the Musk deal back on with Twitter. There's the election in Brazil. How much other crap have I missed? Markets are rebounding from the lows. And of course, when you're off the lows, that's always bullish. At least that's what CNBC likes to tell us. The Fed pivot is being priced in already. Mortgage rates are at 7%. I mean, where do I start? Where the hell? What's left of the world? What isn't destroyed? Hell, I didn't even think about Ukraine. You had Elon Musk whacking the hornet's nest right before he decided to go back and go through, supposedly now for reals this time, his deal to buy Twitter. He stepped on the Ukrainian hornet's nest. He basically tweeted out a poll and said, hey, what if we just went back to the Minsk agreement? He didn't call it the Minsk agreement, but he described the Minsk agreement. And he even said, hey, why don't we have a referendum for the Donbass to join Russia with UN observers, instead of other international observers, i.e. make them very pro-Western election observers. And if the West agrees that, that it's a fair election, how can they dispute the results if the people in the Donbass decide, what, we really don't want to be a part of Ukraine, which they clearly don't. For that, Musk was labeled a Russian traitor. He, I'm sure, will be added to the Ukrainian state's enemies list, along with people like John Mearsheimer and Glenn Greenwald. Arestovich, who I can't remember what his exact position is. I should have looked it up, but I hear his name all the time. He's a prominent leader of the Kiev regime. Arestovich. He tweeted a picture of Elon Musk in the chair that what was the name of the guy? The former leader of the opposition, back when the Ukrainian parliament had an opposition, the old leader of the opposition who was captured and imprisoned and made a POW at the start of the war, who was recently traded away to Russia. There was a picture of him, all tied up in a chair and being held hostage. And Arestovich photoshopped in Elon Musk's face. So the Ukrainian regime directly threatening Elon Musk's life. Well, maybe if not his life, maybe at least his freedom. That's a very clear threat that they were going to kidnap him and imprison him for the crime of asking the wrong questions. And so, since Elon Musk, it was leaked to the Wall Street Journal that Musk was back on with the deal and was just going to go forward at the formerly agreed price. Twitter was limit up twice, and so it's completely closed now. I think they closed it at like 47 and change. And Musk, at least as of right now, is going to be buying Twitter at $54.10 a share, I think was the price I saw. So a decent profit for anybody who was able to go in today and snag some Twitter stock. Now, on to Brazil. I'm going to bounce around a lot, so forgive me, but I'm trying to cover everything, but then I might think of something else to say back. So I might have more to say on Twitter or on, Musk in Ukraine, or like right now I'm going to talk about the Brazilian election. I might jump back to this later after I'm done. But Lula came in first, but it is going to go to a runoff because in Brazil they do have, it's kind of like France, I guess. They have a first and a second round presidential election. Lula got 48 and somewhere in that range. Bolsonaro 43, and then a bunch of small fry under them. They are going to go to a runoff, but I would assume, based on the difference right now, Bolsonaro is probably still going to lose. But then again, I think the polls showed Lula winning and it not even going to a runoff because he was supposed to get over 50%. Now, I'm not familiar with all of the smaller candidates in the Brazilian presidential election. But I would imagine that since Lula only needs to make up 2 points and Bolsonaro needs to make up like 7, there are probably enough votes from the other left-wing candidates, assuming there are other left-wing candidates, or at least non-right-leaning candidates, that Lula can pick up to get him over the 50%. Bolsonaro is going to have a much tougher time there. So based on that alone, I would assume old Lula to be back in office, which would be quite interesting, considering that I think he was thrown in prison the last time that he was president. But it's funny. I guess Bolsonaro's been able to shift the Overton window. It used to be that Lula was like the crazy extreme outsider who was so dangerous to the Brazilian political establishment that they locked him in prison. Now they let him out of prison so that he could go take out Bolsonaro, who they see as an even bigger threat. So overall, that's probably a good sign for Brazilian politics, that these are the kinds of candidates that the left and right are putting up. Not that I am, necessarily a huge fan of either of them. I mean, I like Bolsonaro on sort of a personality level. He's fun, has a good, has had some good tweets over the years. The interesting thing is, though, that from what I recall, part of the reason why Lula was disliked by a lot of the establishment, not only in Brazil but in the West in general, was because I think he was more of a pro-Russia and China kind of guy, in the tradition of, South American left. They typically found themselves aligned more with Russia, China, and Cuba. And Russia right now is the big boogeyman, even more so than China, but soon enough I'm sure China will come back into focus. So no matter who wins in Brazil, Brazil is not going to be in sort of the Washington column. They're not going to be a puppet like Germany or Britain. It seems that for all intents and purposes, neoliberalism is dead in Brazil. And so on net, I do think that that is a good thing. Now, I guess I'll try and move on to Credit Suisse. God, there's so many things. Any one of these topics should have been their own day, but I've missed so much. I got to make up somehow. Credit Suisse, I'll be honest, I haven't formed an intelligent opinion on yet. I know what people are saying. I've heard arguments both ways. I've heard some people saying, stop it. Yes, the spreads on their credit default swaps are pretty high, but other companies have survived worse. And then, of course, I've heard the dominant narrative, which is Credit Suisse is Lehman Brothers 2.0, who coincidentally just finished their liquidation 14 years after declaring bankruptcy. Now, in lieu of being able to discuss Credit Suisse's finances in detail, which I'm not qualified to do, one, and two, I think it's a bit of a fool's errand. What matters is whether or not something like what people are expecting Credit Suisse to turn into is possible and is going to happen. To the first question, is it possible? Yes, I think that it is quite probable, as long as the Fed continues hiking interest rates. That is what tends to happen. When the Fed hikes interest rates, eventually they'll get to a point that something in the system breaks, and the weakest link is going to be what breaks. Now, the question is Credit Suisse the weakest link? Is it Deutsche Bank? Is it somebody else? I don't know. And it doesn't really matter, because it will be somebody. Might not be them, might not be today, might not be tomorrow. But if the Fed continues down this path, it's going to happen. And there's a strong possibility that they've already passed that point. So I'm going to keep watching the Credit Suisse situation. I have to do a lot more research, really understand the details to know if this is it. And of course, even if this is the big one, it'll just be the first domino to fall. So we've got a long road ahead towards the next financial crisis, which is going to happen eventually. That is how this business cycle is going to end. And as far as I'm concerned, we're already in the recession. It's only the U.S. federal government that refuses to recognize that. But our financial system is not completely broken down yet, and that is ultimately what has to happen. The housing market is pretty well toasted. Uh, mortgage rates at 7%, you're not supporting the housing prices that we have in this country. It's just not going to happen. And I think certainly in my region in particular now, we're probably going to see an even steeper drop-off, an even more rapid decline in the housing market because of the devastation from this hurricane. There's going to be a lot of people who are probably having to move out because their house has been destroyed and they can't afford to buy another one here. And they can't afford that, to fix the house they're in probably. But the housing crash, just like everything else, is going to be national and to some extent international, since the dollar is an international currency. Credit Suisse, notably, is not an American bank. It's a Swiss bank. Nevertheless, it is affected by the tightening in the dollar market. I didn't check the dollar index, but it's been going up pretty consistently for a while now, and that is in relation to other currencies, of course. Domestically, yes, we've had a lot of inflation, but internationally, dollars are becoming more and more scarce. And that's making it hard for people with dollar-denominated debt to pay their bills. Honestly, as the situation continues to deteriorate, the idea of China invading Taiwan and annexing it once and for all becomes, it feels much less of a distant possibility and much more like something that is the logical progression from where we are now. Now, that might seem like a strange progression to you, to go from talking about Elon Musk buying Twitter to hurricanes to housing crashes and financial crises. But there is so much going on in the world. There is so much going on in the West. There is so much going on in America that I think that the time will be ripe much sooner than we think for the Chinese to make their move on Taiwan, which once upon a time perhaps they wouldn't have actually gone forward with, because everyone sort of pretended that the status quo was going to change at some point, and there wasn't much of need or motivation to do anything differently. But as animosity between the United States and Russia and China has intensified, the Chinese, I think understandably, would become much less satisfied with the status quo regarding Taiwan. They would feel the need to assert their dominance if they want, because as far as they're concerned, they've had this claim since 1949, and as long as it's been recognized and everyone remembers and acknowledges it, it gives the distance between them and taking over Taiwan was kind of short. It was something that they could do, but probably wouldn't. But if the U.S. keeps pushing, as they have been, just like with Ukraine, to try and drive Taiwan further and further from China and assert more and more that no, Taiwan will never be a part of China again, then the Chinese, I think, feel like they have to act out and strike while the iron is hot. Before the idea of Taiwan as a breakaway Chinese province dies in the global psyche, China has to move in and assert their claim. Otherwise, China's claim to Taiwan will fade away, become much more remote, and less legitimate over time. And this is, I think, the same thing that happened with the Ruskies. The Ruskies realized this about Donbass and eastern Ukraine, and even Crimea back in 2014, that the more that they allow this, this anti-Moscow regime in Kiev to fester and be propped up and entrenched by the United States, the weaker their claims and their interests in eastern Ukraine would become. And so therefore, the Ruskies had to finally strike and claim what they felt was rightfully theirs. And of course, we're still in the process of dealing with that. I don't know that China would necessarily invade Taiwan while well, who knows? Maybe it would be a good time to do it while Russia's already in Ukraine. But anyway, I'm exhausted. Um, like I said, I've got a lot going on here personally, but there's so much here that I want to cover, and I can't really get deep into stuff until I get back into this for a few days in a row, and I can really take time to explore each of these topics one at a time. And so that's what I intend to do. As we get further from the hurricane, I will have more and more free time again to try and do this. So again, just like I've said in every video so far, I will try my best to be back tomorrow. But so far I haven't been able to do that. I've left gaps of first 1 day and then 2 days. So, with that said, have a nice day. That's what I'll say.